The episode was called The New Toy. It begins on a normal morning. Peppa wakes up, walks downstairs, has breakfast with her family, and then goes back to her room to play. George is downstairs playing with his dinosaur, Mummy is cleaning in the kitchen, and Daddy Pig is reading his newspaper. Everything feels calm and familiar. Peppa walks into her room and starts placing her toys on the carpet. She takes out her doll, some blocks, and her little toy house. But then she notices something new on the shelf. There is a small plush pig sitting there. It is pink, with soft ears and a tiny smile. Peppa stops and looks at it. She says, "I don't remember this toy." She picks up the little plush pig and examines it carefully. "Hello," Peppa says to the toy. "Are you mine?" Then she walks downstairs and shows it to Mummy. "Mummy, is this my toy?" Peppa asks. Mummy looks at the plush pig and answers calmly. "Of course, Peppa. You've always had that toy." Peppa looks surprised. "Always?" "Yes," Mummy says. "You used to play with it a lot." Peppa frowns slightly. She tries to remember, but she can't. "That's strange. I don't remember it at all." Daddy Pig looks up from his newspaper and smiles. "Sometimes we just forget about old toys," he says. Peppa nods, but she still feels like something isn't quite right. She goes back to her room and places the toy on the shelf. Then she continues playing with her other toys. The rest of the day passes normally. Peppa and George play together, the family eats dinner, and in the evening, Peppa goes to bed. Before falling asleep, she looks at the shelf. The plush pig is still sitting exactly where she left it. "Good night," Peppa says, and turns off the light. During the night, the room is quiet. Moonlight shines through the window and falls softly on the floor and the toys. In the morning, Peppa wakes up and sits on her bed. She looks around the room, and then she notices something. The plush pig is no longer on the shelf. Now it is lying on the carpet. Peppa slowly gets up and walks closer. "But I put you on the shelf," she says quietly. She picks up the toy and places it back where it was. Then she goes downstairs for breakfast. During the day, everything seems normal again. Peppa plays, draws pictures, and reads a book. But every now and then she looks up at the shelf. The toy is still there. That evening she goes to bed again. Before closing her eyes, she checks the shelf one more time. The plush pig is sitting exactly where she left it. But the next morning, Peppa wakes up and notices something strange again. This time the toy is sitting on the chair beside her bed. Peppa slowly walks over to it. "I definitely didn't put you here." She looks at the toy for a few seconds. Then she quietly says, "Maybe. It's just my imagination." But before leaving the room, Peppa turns around, and for a moment, it almost feels like the little plush pig is looking right at her. The episode was called The Day That Repeats. It begins on a normal morning in Peppa Pig's house. Peppa wakes up, walks downstairs, and sees Daddy Pig sitting at the table reading his newspaper. Mummy Pig is making breakfast, and George is sitting on the floor playing with his dinosaur. Everything looks completely normal. Daddy Pig lifts his head and says, "Good morning, Peppa." Mummy smiles and says, "Breakfast is ready." Peppa sits down, eats her breakfast, and then walks to school. At school, everything seems normal too. The children sit at their desks, the teacher begins the lesson, Pedro raises his hand, and Susie whispers something to Peppa. After the lesson, everyone goes outside for recess and plays in the schoolyard. The day goes by calmly, and in the evening, Peppa returns home. She has dinner with her family, plays a little with George, and then goes to bed. But the next morning, something strange happens. Peppa wakes up again and hears Daddy's voice from the kitchen. "Good morning, Peppa." She walks downstairs and sees the exact same scene. Daddy Pig is sitting with his newspaper. Mummy Pig is making the same breakfast. George is playing with his dinosaur in the same spot. Everything looks exactly the same as yesterday. Peppa frowns. "We already did this yesterday," she says. But Daddy Pig just smiles and says again, "Good morning, Peppa." Peppa begins to notice more strange things. At school, Pedro raises his hand at the exact same moment. Susie says the same words. Even the teacher asks the same questions. During recess, the children play the exact same game. Peppa tries to change things. She answers questions earlier than before. She says different words. She suggests a new game, but the children still behave almost exactly the same way. The next day, everything repeats again. Peppa wakes up. Daddy Pig is reading the same newspaper. Mummy Pig says, "Breakfast is ready." George is playing with his dinosaur. Peppa tries something different. "Daddy, you're about to say good morning," she says. Daddy Pig smiles and replies, "Good morning, Peppa." Peppa looks surprised. At school, she tries to leave the classroom early, but she still ends up in the same place. She looks at the clock on the wall, but the hands barely move. By the end of the day, Peppa feels that something is very wrong. She sits quietly at her desk and whispers, "Why does everything keep repeating?" No one answers. Then Peppa slowly raises her head and looks straight ahead, as if she is looking directly at someone. For a few seconds, she says nothing. Then she quietly asks, "Do you see it too?" And the episode ends. It starts like a completely normal morning. The sun is shining through the window. Peppa walks downstairs. Mummy Pig is making breakfast. George is pushing his dinosaur across the floor. And Daddy Pig is sitting at the table reading his newspaper. He looks up and says, "Good morning, Peppa." But right away, Peppa feels that something isn't right. Her dad's voice sounds slightly quieter and more even than usual, without his normal, cheerful tone. He laughs at something in the newspaper, but the laugh sounds strange. Too identical, with no pauses, no breathing, almost like a recording playing. The whole day seems calm, but Peppa starts noticing small things. Daddy doesn't get out of breath on the hill. He doesn't mix up the map. He doesn't trip or fall into a muddy puddle like he normally would. He does everything correctly, too correctly. Even when George spills his juice, Daddy doesn't react the way he usually does. He just says, "That's fine," in a flat voice. His face stays calm. When Peppa tells him an old joke that always made him laugh the loudest, he simply smiles and says, "That is funny." But he doesn't laugh, and his eyes don't change, like there's no real happiness behind them. Peppa decides to test him again. At dinner, she sits in Daddy's usual chair on purpose. Normally, he would notice and joke about it, but he just stands there for a moment, as if he doesn't understand something is different. Then he slowly sits in another chair and continues eating. No joke, no smile. That night, Peppa wakes up because of a quiet knocking sound. Knock, knock, knock. At first, she thinks it's the wind, but it happens again. She walks into the hallway and sees the kitchen light on. Daddy is standing by the wall staring at one spot. He isn't moving. He isn't blinking. "Daddy," Peppa whispers. He slowly turns his head and says, "I am here, Peppa." He smiles, but his eyes look empty. "Why aren't you sleeping?" she asks. "I don't get tired," he replies, and the sentence sounds just as flat as it did that morning. In the morning, everything looks normal again. Daddy laughs loudly, complains that he's tired, breathes heavily after climbing the stairs. But Peppa doesn't believe it. She starts asking questions. "Daddy, remember when we got stuck in the elevator?" she asks. "Of course," he answers without hesitation. "Where was that?" He pauses for a second. "In the elevator," he says, and it sounds wrong, like he isn't remembering, just repeating the word. Later that day, Peppa notices the basement door is slightly open. It's usually locked, and from downstairs, she hears the knocking again. Knock, knock, she asks Mummy, but Mummy calmly says, Daddy is upstairs and everything is fine. Peppa knows that isn't true. She carefully opens the door and walks down the dark stairs. The basement feels cold and quiet. The knocking gets louder. In the corner, there is a large wooden box. From inside, someone whispers, Peppa! It's her real dad's voice, weak and scared. Peppa! That's not me upstairs. Peppa spins around. At the top of the stairs stands the new dad. He looks down at her and smiles that same even smile. I have always been here, he says calmly. His voice now sounds deeper and colder. The lights begin to flicker. The real daddy knocks again from inside the box, asking for help. Peppa quickly grabs a key lying nearby and unlocks it. The real daddy climbs out of breath, dirty, shaking. The new dad slowly steps down one stair and says quietly, There is only room for one dad in this house.